Hey guys, what is going on? It is Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. And as always, we're going to be doing a deep dive into a topic that is near and dear to my heart, as I keep about 6 tanks with betta and shrimp. And I guess I just gave away the lead, which is, it is possible, but it is very difficult, and you need to take a lot of things into consideration. So there's a long-standing belief in the aquarium hobby that betta are this very aggressive fish. In fact, they're called Chinese fighting fish or Siamese fighting fish. And that they're these beautiful little psychopaths that supposedly are so aggressive they must be kept all alone, away from other fish. However, over the last decade or so, this myth or thought has become less popular, and many people have shown through social media here on YouTube and other places that it is possible to keep betta in a community tank with plenty of other fish without much of a problem at all. Usually you'll see this in the form of a betta kept with a number of fish around the same size, but usually smaller fish, small tetras or rasboras, or small loaches, something like that, and maybe a pleco or two. Or you'll see what is commonly referred to as a Betta Sorority, which is a group of all-female bettas living in a tank together, and they usually have far more muted colors, and oftentimes in Betta Splendens, which is the type we usually get at the big box stores, they have some horizontal lines down their body, and more grays and earth tones mixed in with a blue or purple or green color. So, the question I get asked all the time, and that I always hesitate to answer, is can I keep my betta in a community tank or in a small tank with shrimp? Be it with fish and shrimp or just shrimp, it doesn't really matter. It's a problem because if it fits, it's food. The first rule of Fish Club is if it fits in its mouth, it can be food. So baby shrimp fit perfectly in a betta's mouth, unfortunately. And any given betta that sees a baby shrimp in front of it instinctually is going to want to eat it. So the first thing you can do to reduce this, if you're going to attempt to keep them together, which admittedly I've done fairly successfully, in fact my colonies of shrimp have increased in number while my bettas have lived with them, is you're going to need a very well planted tank, and the more room you have in the tank, the better. Also, the more shrimp you start out with, the better odds they're going to have in reproducing and making more babies. So even if they eat a few of the babies, still more are surviving than are getting picked off. The first thing that you can do to protect the shrimp, before we even talk about all the science regarding bettas, is you can create rock piles as well as little areas with small caves that you can make out of little materials, or you can buy ceramic caves just for shrimp to crawl around in. And then you can cover those areas with layers of things like Java moss or Christmas moss, things like sawassertang and guppy grass. And then all along that, you can also plant into the substrate a nice layer of stem plants that are nice, thick, and bushy that run towards the top of the water column, and that will keep your fish occupied higher up. Now, a few babies will probably stray, but after a few get eaten, most of them get the idea and move towards the bottom of the tank and hide while they're still small and vulnerable. Because in the first few months of their life, they're constantly shedding to grow. So they're constantly molting their exoskeleton to grow in size, and they're needing to eat and graze on biofilm all day long. So it's important to also have a mature tank that can already support these fish and these shrimp together. So obviously you need a cycled tank, which I'm not going to talk about in this video, but needless to say, you want to have as close to no nitrates as possible, both for the shrimp and for the betta, but also you want to have a little bit of KH and a little bit of GH, which there's plenty of videos on, but that's part of your total dissolved solids, and what that does is that allows the exoskeleton of the shrimp to build, and same with snails. It's also not a bad idea to have some snails in there to help eat any excess algae, and also to graze out in the open in the spots like on the glass that the shrimp might be tempted to go to. And if the snails have cleaned it up first, where the betta can't get at the snails because they're, well, snails, then they won't be up there, and they'll be down below where the snails are eating above. So once you've done this and you've provided as good of a habitat as you can for the shrimp, we need to talk about bettas. So, like it or not, bettas were bred by humans to be aggressive. Wild bettas aren't some super mean aggressive fish in the scheme of things. There's plenty of cichlids and even tetras and rasboras and danios that are just as aggressive as many of the wild betta species. In fact, there are over 75 species of wild bettas. But Bettas splendens, the type you see in the big box stores that are really beautiful, also you see them at your local stores, they're usually Bettas splendens. And these are the ones that have been domesticated for over 1,000 years. And in fact, recent research that came out last year suggests that they've been being domesticated for the purpose of specifically fighting one another for 1,200 years. And they know that by looking at their mitochondrial DNA. So while they were looking at their DNA and they noticed that recessive traits had been selected for over and over and over again, which is something that doesn't happen in the wild unless a population is very isolated and needs to change very quickly and is dying unless they adapt with these rare traits, they're seeing that across the spectrum of the genome of the existing bettas now, that all throughout hundreds and hundreds of years, these same recessive genes kept getting reinforced, and then new recessive genes kept popping up, and new mutations that popped up were being maintained rather than disappearing back into the lineage when they find specimens in the wild. So, what does all of this mean? Well, it means that they're unfortunately a slightly more aggressive fish now. And where this aggression generally stems from is when they're protecting their bubble nest. So in the wild, these fish are aggressive only part of the year in any serious way. And they claim a small territory in shallow puddles generally, or rice paddies, or shallow streams, or bodies of water that are slow moving. And what they do is they set up a small area, maybe 6 by 6 inches or so, and they'll build a bubble nest if they're a male. They'll start blowing bubbles, and that is where they're going to attract a female, fight off any males that come trying to take away their female, and they're going to store the female's eggs and then protect that area for a number of days until the eggs hatch. Well, all of this causes a betta's body to naturally respond to several things and then become more aggressive. The first thing that causes them to spawn is when the temperature in the tank has increased. So when temperature increases and there's a lone male and no female to spawn with, oftentimes he'll still start trying to get ready to spawn because he has these chemical processes going on in his physiology that are telling him it's time to look pretty, it's time to put on muscle, it's time to put on stamina, and it's time to build a nest, as well as sometimes foregoing eating for a week or two while you guard the nest and while you dance vigorously to try to convince the female to be his chosen one. On the flip side, the females can do the same thing, so you're not always safe by using females and assuming they're going to be less aggressive. Now, they generally are a little bit less aggressive, but it's not a steadfast rule, and when it comes to shrimp, it's not always an aggression thing, it's rather a food thing. So you're trying to prevent the betta from going into this spawning condition where it wants to eat a whole lot of food. It starts moving all around its territory to look for enemies and to look for safe spots to lay eggs and things like this. And it's that agitated behavior that causes your shrimp to get eaten usually. So if your shrimp have places to hide, then they know what to do when they see this fish coming around and picking off one or two of their siblings, there's usually going to be 20 or 30 more siblings around to learn the lesson and over time to just stay low. So the more planted your tank is, the better. But also those same chemicals that cause the fish to spawn can build up if you don't change the water in your tank. And in fact, the same chemicals that are in humans, so testosterone, estrogen, epinephrine, and cortisol, all are different hormones that react throughout the fish's body to tell it to get ready to change in order to have babies or to find a mate. Just like humans go through puberty and have a growth spurt, and a lot of times teenagers are really hungry and their body changes, oftentimes these fish will change colors. Usually at around a year old or a year and a half old, bettas will start changing their color, especially if it's during a first spawn. And a lot of times when they see reflections on the glass, they'll actually become more agitated and their body will produce more of these chemicals. So with signals like a warming tank going above the 72 to 76 degree Fahrenheit mark, if you're getting over, say, 28 Celsius or over around 78 Fahrenheit, this can trigger your fish to actually start going into that spawning mode and to being far more territorial and far more aggressive. And we want to avoid that if possible. One way to avoid that is by doing water changes. Weekly water changes of, say, 10 or 20% can be enough to stave this off. Because testosterone does this funny thing. It actually breaks down due to an enzyme known as aromatase. And it breaks down in humans the same way, but it actually breaks down from testosterone into estrogen, and it can trick that male betta into thinking that there's a female around, even if he doesn't see one, which then tricks the betta into producing more testosterone, which then tricks in the water, breaks down again by after it's been metabolized, it's secreted, and when it's in the water, then it starts the cycle all over again, and it can build up into a feedback loop. Now, likewise, if the fish is stressed or agitated, which oftentimes spawning without a mate can do, being in that increased temperature or just feeling confined, even just seeing a mirror, it also releases cortisol, which is what we know as a stress hormone. And unfortunately, when we were talking about the genetics, there was another thing that they found in the genetics, which was that when these fish color up to spawn, they start eating specific foods. One of the foods that they always try to eat are carotenoids. Just like the color orange in carrots, there's a group of chemicals that are directly tied to pigments in animals, just in fish, in humans, in all sorts of creatures. And it is what causes the red colors, the oranges, some of the pinks, and some of the dark purples also. And this same, the same gene that causes fish to become more aggressive that were in the fish that were selected to wrestle and fight in Southeast Asia 1200 years ago, this same chemical is linked to the gene because it actually, the more that gene has been selected for, the more the aggression rises, the more their production of the beta carotene pigmentation goes up. So it's not that having the beta carotene in the water causes them to be aggressive. It's that if they are already an aggressive fish, the red colors are going to come out, which seems kind of odd, but in nature, red is kind of a warning color anyways. So it's just kind of one of those odd quirks that they found out, as well as the fact that their gender is not on their X and Y chromosomes. It actually can float onto different chromosomes. But that's a story for another episode. So what we're going to talk about today is that maybe you don't want to select a bright red fish or a dark purple fish if you can help it. Now, individual fish have different personalities just like individual people, and they've been bred for color over the last 200 years, more so probably than for their ability to fight, wrestle, and have stamina. But those genes that were selected for way back when 1200 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, there was a lot more time spent on making these fish tough. And to be tough, they needed to eat a lot of calories, a lot of omega-3s and a lot of omega-6s, and a lot of betta food has that in it because it's designed to keep your fish good looking, which they do look beautiful when they're spawning. But when their colors are bright, they also become more agitated. They also release more stress hormone. And as I was saying earlier, when they see a reflection of themselves, they assume it's either another male that's coming to fight, or they think it's a female that they need to do a dance and attract if they don't get a good look, or if they're seeing bettas from another tank across the way, they can even make this assumption. And both those things can trigger this. So you want to eliminate reflective surfaces in your betta tank unless you're trying to breed them. It's going to make them try to pack on the weight so that they can do their mating dance and gain their weight and put on their bright colors. Also, live food, as much as it's a great thing to do for your fish, it's going to increase that instinct to hunt and that instinct to see movement and equate it with food. If you can train your fish to think of you and dried flake food or pellets or freeze-dried food, even frozen bloodworms and things like that, if you can train it to think of that as food once or twice a day, over time, especially after the betta's reached about a year old and gone through its final color change, they become much more relaxed. And these cycles of chemical and hormone spikes that can happen in a small body of water, like a 5-gallon tank or smaller, are a lot less likely to happen and start spiraling out of control. Now, another thing you can do is you can also add botanicals to the water. You don't want to add so much that it makes the water too acidic for your shrimp. Most shrimp need to be around neutral or slightly acidic. But your betta will really thank you because its immune system is based on its slime coat partially, and its slime coat is greatly enhanced by the presence of tannins and botanical chemicals that are a part of many plants. So adding things like dried leaves or seed pods or nut pods are going to be really helpful to the health of your betta in general, but also to the mood of your betta. It's going to be less stressed if it's not sick, and the more consistent you can keep those tank conditions and the more similar to a betta's life in the wild, the better your betta is going to behave. Now, lastly, one thing to consider about when selecting your betta is going to be two factors, and that is that large finned fish like a full moon or half moon betta, the bettas with the big fancy fluffy ruffled fins, they are a lot slower generally at attacking. When we talk about placotte bettas, they definitely have smaller fins and they tend to be much more streamlined and able to make it through plants or around sticks and obstacles, whereas your bigger bettas, they kind of have to account for the fact that their fins don't allow them to move so quickly. And while this is good because they can't hunt as many shrimp in many cases, oftentimes if you don't get them from a very good breeder, you're going to end up with a line of the most inbred bettas that are out there and with some of the most health problems that are out there. So sticking with something in between is probably what I would recommend, or even just going with the placotte and getting it from a local breeder that you trust, because the less they've been bred for aggression and the more they've been bred for colors, the better. If you can avoid the reds, that's been shown to not be linked to that aggression gene. And also just the fact that if you buy from a local breeder, you know that the fish hasn't been stressed, doesn't already have cortisol and cortisone levels up, which can then build up in the water and cause it to become agitated, which can cause it to think that it needs to either fight or run. And it has no place to run. It's either going to get stressed and its health will decrease, or it will think it's getting ready to fight and fight off an enemy in its territory, and that's when you see the testosterone spike and that whole circle of estrogen and testosterone cycling as the fish produces those things when the water isn't being changed, cleaned, and replenished with those healthy tannins and botanical elements. So I highly recommend that you get to know your breeder and ask them, which one of these has a good temperament. Also, if your breeder grows their bettas up together in a small group with its siblings, it's going to be far more used to having other fish, including other bettas, in its space and territory, as well as all those chemical signals that are being released by those other bettas. So while most adult bettas are split up by almost all breeders, many breed them out in batches, and it's a great time to get it, then observe it for a few months, get to know its temperament, and if it seems like it's a fairly laid back and gentle fish, it's not constantly pacing, constantly wanting food, and almost even coming out of the water to get food from you every time you feed it, even if it's full, signs like that, or coloring up, or flashing its fins, then you can assume that it's probably going to be a fairly laid back fish, especially after it hits that year to year and a half mark, with most breeders selling them at the 6 month to a year old mark if you're getting it from a local reputable breeder. Now, different strains will have different attitudes also, because personality happens to be linked to some of their visual appearance genes. And so talking to your local breeder can also help a ton. Now, I hope this stuff has helped you guys, and I hope that with the information provided today, that maybe you can make some better choices about how to approach this sort of setup. Also, the last thing I want to say is, if you don't know about something that we've discussed, I'll have links in the description to basic care or breeding, or what a densely planted tank looks like, so you guys can get an idea about that, because you definitely want lots of plants, not just 5 or 6, but really a wall of plants that separates the shrimp or other nanofish from the betta when they just need a timeout and they need a break in the sight, or the line of sight that is, from one another. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Alright everybody, so I realize that none of these suggestions are a magical cure to prevent all predation by your bettas against your shrimp and your nano fish that are in the aquarium. But I hope that this information, plus maybe brushing up on the care of your shrimp and bettas, will greatly improve your success and survival rates within your aquarium. And because this was such an in-depth and wide-ranging video, I want to include some links about balancing ecosystems and plant diversity, density, and selection, as well as how you design your hardscape and how you can help protect your fish and invertebrates, specifically like fish fry and nanofish, from larger ones, by the way you set up your tank. And I highly recommend that everybody brushes up on the basics on all the plants in their tank and all the fish inhabitants of their tank. Look up species spotlights. If I don't include them in the link below, look up whatever fish are in your tank and make sure that the tank they're in and the community they're with is fitting. So that is why I also make sure to always add links to these types of videos, these in-depth ones, and I want to include like how to breed, how to care for, and just other lists like other fish that can go well with them and so forth, as well as just general tips and tricks. And all my videos on any of these deep dives are always backed on science along with experience, and they are about where those two things intersect, where my experience and the experience of others who have been in the hobby for a long time intersects with the scientific information. And I like to bring you a little bit of both. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed the Secret History Living in Your Aquarium Betta versus Shrimp episode. And if you made it this far, I want to give you a special thank you. You are in the elite 32% of viewers who ever make it this far in a video. So thank you so very much for your views, for the support of the channel, and also for sharing your knowledge and insight into the hobby in the comments and in the live streams. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and click that thumbs up like button. It really does help spread this sort of highly researched content across YouTube's mysterious platform algorithm. And if you'd like to know more about any of the issues we talked about today, or anything related to freshwater aquaria, please also just select that alert bell, and you'll be getting all my newest episodes. And if you leave a comment, I'll try to cover whatever it is that you're curious about. And we also talk about giveaways and contests and weekly live streams and announcements and all that. So if you click that bell and subscribe, you'll be all up to date on that. So thank you so much for sticking around. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.